State investigators step in as Camp Mystic seeks to renew its license.
And I think to that point, you've got this issue of 850 kids being at a camp that is still an evidence field.
We break down what the complaints allege and the court challenge that could keep the camp closed.
We're going to say data center a lot through this interim.
From AI to cloud computing, data centers are driving new demand for power in Texas. The concerns from lawmakers and the pitch from businesses as the state looks at how to prepare the grid. Governor Abbott freezes H-1B visas at state agencies, but it's business as usual for some state contractors.
I think it's unrealistic that the governor is going to go after these companies.
We investigate the gap in the visa policy and why some companies are not touched by the freeze.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. The Texas Department of Public Safety says Texas Rangers are now helping investigate complaints of neglect by Camp Mystic during the July floods. 27 Camp Mystic campers and counselors died during the floods. Several families have filed several lawsuits against the camp since the tragedy, alleging gross negligence. They argue the young victims could have been saved. DPS says Rangers will help the state's health department with its investigation. In a statement, the department says since early February, it's received hundreds of complaints regarding Camp Mystic's operations last summer. This comes as a judge prepares to hear evidence in a case that seeks to prevent Camp Mystic from reopening. The family of Seal Stewart, a young girl who died in the flood, asked a judge to block Camp Mystic from renovating or altering its Guadalupe site. Stewart's body has not been found. The judge granted the request in March, which prevents the camp from altering or destroying cabins on the site. Now, camp leaders are appealing that injunction. There's a lot to unpack here. Avery Travis has been covering this story from the start. Let's start with the hearing Monday. Do we know who is set to testify and what can we expect?
You know, we're expecting some big and potentially emotional testimony and a lot of evidence. The judge has blocked off 3 days in her courtroom for this. It's an evidentiary hearing, so we're going to hear a lot of facts about what happened that day and the days following that flood. We know the starting point, though, will be with members of the Eastland family. That's the family who owns and operates the camp. And specifically, we know that because that's where testimony left off at the last evidentiary hearing at the beginning of March. We actually heard testimony from Edward Eastland. He is one of the operators of the camp, and he's the son of Richard Eastland, who died actually trying to save some of the campers on that early morning. The other thing that people can expect is a packed courtroom. We know that many of these hearings, whether they have been complicated like the prior evidentiary hearing or really just procedural updates in the case so far, supporters of families of the victims, other families who have lost children in this case, supporters of the Stewart family, and then supporters of the Eastland family and people who are supportive of the camp reopening have attended these hearings. The gallery has been packed, and so that's something people should be aware of.
But this isn't a trial. This is really the first step in a larger legal process, right?
That's exactly right, Josh. The family of Seal Stewart and their attorneys have said their goal with this lawsuit is to try and stop the camp from operating, and that would happen down the road in a trial in this wrongful death suit, but that could be months, if not years away. So the first step to that, their attorneys say, is asking a judge for that temporary injunction that you mentioned. And their goal with that is to essentially stop Camp Mystic from having people on the Guadalupe River site right now, and more specifically to stop them from making renovations or changes to that campsite, adjustments to some of the cabins that were damaged in this. And generally, to try to keep people off the site while their lawsuit progresses. They say there's evidence there that they need, and more broadly, while the search for their daughters remains continue. But what's important to note is, as you said, Camp Mystic has appealed that temporary injunction. The camp's attorneys have argued that their clients will suffer harm from this injunction in the meantime, while no one can be on this campsite. They also questioned the integrity of that March hearing. They said that it was maybe not fair, was the insinuation. And so because of that, the judge is bringing all of them back to the courtroom, that same judge who issued that injunction, to hear more facts about the case and more testimony.
And this isn't just one lawsuit. There are other cases moving forward. How different are they from each other?
Right. We know of at least 4 or 5 lawsuits filed by families of victims and folks against Camp Mystic. Some by groups of families who have banded together, families who lost their daughters, who say that Camp Mystic should have done more to prevent that loss. Some of the families have actually also sued the state of Texas, alleging that the camp was operating without the proper evacuation plans, and they're trying to hold the state accountable for that. But the Stewart family filed separately, and their attorneys have started to make the case that their situation is unique and heartbreaking as the search for their daughter continues, that you noted with the Texas Rangers and the Department of State Health Services. They say there are unique complexities that brings, and that's why we've seen so much already happening in that case as they try to keep people off that campsite while their case proceeds.
So beyond the lawsuits, we know that Camp Mystic has also applied to renew its license. How does that stand with the state?
And that's a separate process entirely from the courts, right? It's a regulatory process with the state health services. We know youth camps regularly have to renew their license to operate, and so Camp Mystic has done that. And they say they're doing so in compliance with all of the new camp safety laws and regulations. In fact, we know they were one of the first camps in the state to roll out some brand new flood and siren warning technology. They have noted that they have nearly 900 girls enrolled already to attend camp this summer at that Cypress Lake location. Something, though, that the Stewart family has argued is they say they've seen that document, that application. It's publicly filed. It's with the state. We're working to get a copy of it here at KXAN. But they say they're concerned about some of the water activities that are listed in the application, that they seem like they would be utilizing the Guadalupe River waters where this flood occurred for some of those water activities, and that's something that the Stewart family is worried about. It's part of why they say they were seeking this injunction to try to stop people from being on those campgrounds. Now, this application process and whether or not Camp Mystic can reopen, especially by this summer as the search for Seal Stewart's body continues, is really at the heart of a lot of this, and it's something we're starting to see state leaders weigh in on as well.
Yeah, we've heard Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick talk about this. How is politics playing into what's happening right now?
Right. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has come out and said he does not think that the state should grant that license, that renewal. We've also seen other lawmakers who have seemed favorable to Camp Mystic reopening their operations. We've also seen some discourse about lawmakers potentially wanting to come out and tour those campgrounds so that they can see what occurred there and maybe help better influence policymaking about what happens. But that's something that the Stewart family has also noted in some of their legal filings, is wanting to keep people off of the campgrounds unless it is people who are directly related to these ongoing investigations. And according to their injunction, they're asking the judge to keep people off those campgrounds until their lawsuit progresses and proceeds. And so this issue of who can be on the camp and will they be allowed to continue to operate is something we'll continue to see play out in the courtroom on Monday and also at the state capitol.
All right, Avery Travis, thank you very much. A crackdown on foreign workers with a major exception. Our investigation reveals which companies were left untouched by the governor's freeze on H-1B visas. For food truck owners, local rules have long been a maze.
We've had instances where we couldn't organize food truck events in certain cities because their truck regulations were too complicated and time-consuming.
Now Texas lawmakers are making a change. We break down the new law. A surge in power demand is coming to Texas, driven by data centers.
We are looking at a queue of over 400,000 megawatts, 400 gigawatts. So 200 times or 20 times the size of the entire country.
How lawmakers are rethinking the way projects connect to the grid and preparing for decisions that could shape Texas energy for decades. The Texas House State Affairs Committee met Thursday to hear testimony about the growth of data centers. The companies say it's a boon for the Texas economy, but lawmakers are also hearing concerns over the amount of electricity and water required to operate. Committee members heard from energy and data center leaders, and as State Capitol correspondent Adam Schwager reports, the testimony could shape legislation in the next session.
We're going to say data center a lot through this interim.
Texas has quickly become a prime destination for data centers.
Low-cost energy, available workforce, land that they can acquire.
According to the American Edge Project, Texas only trails Virginia in both existing and planned data centers. and those future projects will be more intensive than the existing ones.
10 years ago, a big data center was a 40 megawatt data center. That was a big one.
Okay.
Yeah, today we're talking about 500 to 1,000. So the scale is all of a sudden going off the charts.
To connect to the grid, a data center must make sure someone will create the amount of electricity they need. With Americans expressing concerns about their energy bills going up due to data centers, President Donald Trump said this during the State of the Union.
So I'm telling them they can build their own plant, they're going to produce their own electricity.
While Trump's proclamation isn't legally binding, Texas leaders say they're treating it that way.
We are taking it as something that we have to do to ensure that residential ratepayers are not paying for the costs that are being borne on the system.
While lawmakers brought up a couple of issues their communities see with data centers.
How is that going to impact my constituents as in terms of water availability?
Most of the discussion was about how data centers can be a net positive for Texas.
Again, I go back to Loudoun County, Virginia. They've lowered taxes 2 years in a row, directly attributable to data center revenue that's come in. And so
lawmakers also heard about how ERCOT and the Public Utilities Commission plan to streamline their electricity approval process for data centers to increase speed and reliability.
So we recognize that we needed to change that process in order for this to be able to work for the economy of Texas and for the growth that we want to see happen here.
The data center discussions will continue throughout the rest of the 2026 legislative off year. For State of Texas, I'm Adam Schwager.
During the meeting, some data center representatives tried to address concerns about water use. They pointed to some companies' use of closed-loop water systems, which initially require a large amount of water, but afterwards rely on recirculated water. Who's subject to the state's freeze on H-1B visas and who is not? Our investigation examines how Texas draws the line and why it matters. The rules are changing for food trucks across Texas.
This will help promote entrepreneurism because it cuts down on the red tape.
We explain the law, what it means for vendors, and why cities are pushing back. Amid increased immigration enforcement and widespread deportations, Texas is making it harder for foreign workers to obtain temporary legal status. Governor Abbott is blocking state agencies and universities from entering a federal lottery system allowing them to hire highly skilled employees from overseas. On top of that, the Trump administration made it more expensive for employers to hire them, adding a $100,000 filing fee. But as investigator Matt Grant found, Texans' tax dollars are likely still supporting the system some state leaders criticize.
The fact of the matter is, we want to make sure that our communities are safe. We want to make sure that our communities are not being, having people come in and take jobs that Texans can easily fill.
In January, Governor Abbott wrote in this letter to state agency heads, Texas should lead by example, making sure taxpayer-funded jobs are filled by Texans first. While state agencies and public universities are temporarily barred from sponsoring new H-1B visa workers, we found state tax dollars are still flowing to private companies that do. Some of the largest contracts are IT-related, including a $576 million contract with the Department of Information Resources for tech services and solutions. As state budget records show, Texas holds more than 300 active contracts worth about $6 billion with private companies that rely on foreign workers, including some that employ the highest numbers nationally. We reached out to 5 of those companies. None responded or declined to comment.
Some would question why the state is limiting direct hiring when it's utilizing these companies that are hiring H-1B visa workers.
Immigration attorney Jason Finkelman says cutting ties with those companies could trigger lawsuits.
I think it's unrealistic that the governor is going to go after these companies that are the foundation for a lot of these state agencies' infrastructure and systems, and they're too economically entwined to untangle that.
State lawmakers, however, are taking a closer look. Ahead of the next legislative session, the Texas House ordered an interim study into how the visa program impacts the state and whether it poses any security concerns related to foreign influence and access to sensitive systems and critical infrastructure. The nonprofit American Immigration Council, which looks at the economic impact of immigration policy on businesses, says it supports a legislative review if it helps lawmakers better understand the visa process, arguing restrictive hiring rules make it difficult for companies to compete.
It's hard to do that if you're attacking a large part of their specialty workforce, which is really what those H-1Bs are being used for. Now, should there be conversations about it? And again, ensuring there's transparency and ensuring that no one's abusing this program? Absolutely.
Using data from the federal agency, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, we mapped H-1B visa approvals in every state. In 2025, Texas ranked second behind California. A Pew Research study found in 2023, College Station had the highest concentration of H-1B approvals in the country. Dallas-Fort Worth had among the highest numbers of applications approved. We asked the governor's office whether the state can restrict contracts with private companies using H-1B workers or track how many are assigned to state projects, something that currently isn't happening. A spokesperson declined to answer directly, instead pointing to a broad January press release that also didn't address the question, citing reports of abuse and the need to protect American jobs. But H-1B sponsorship memos we obtained show just 2 weeks before Abbott's freeze on new applications, state agencies were still requesting approval to sponsor H-1B workers, including a data visualization expert for the Department of State Health Services, described as mission critical, helping create and maintain health information dashboards related to measles, eating disorders, and opioid deaths. Petitioning to allow her to stay through an H-1B visa after her student visa would expire, the Office of Chief State Epidemiologist argued her level of skill and expertise would be difficult to replace, writing, "If the agency does not support H-1B sponsorship, it is likely she will be recruited away. In the current labor market, it has been very challenging to attract suitable applicants with her level of proficiency."
If our goal is to attract the best and the brightest talent and ensure that we're leading, you can't ignore the fact that your rhetoric about immigration is going to impact that.
All state agencies with governor-appointed leaders and public universities were required to submit reports by March 27th with the Texas Workforce Commission. They outline how many H-1B workers they have, where they're from, what jobs they hold, and what efforts were made to hire Texans first. We've requested copies of those reports. At the Capitol, Matt Grant, State of Texas.
This past legislative session, Republican State Representative Tony Tinderholt of Arlington filed a bill to restrict H-1B hiring for companies receiving taxpayer dollars through contracts, loans, or grants. The bill never got a hearing. Tinderholt did not run for re-election, so he won't be back in the legislature next year. His office did not respond to requests for comment. Right now on our website, you can find our interactive map showing which states hire the most H-1B workers and which Texas agencies and universities benefit. Just look for the links in this week's State of Texas story.
I opened 1 month ago. Maybe one day I'll do a brick and mortar, but to start off, I'm doing a food truck.
He's just 19 and launching a food truck, and a new Texas law could make it easier for him to do business. We look at what changed and why it could expand where these trucks operate. A major change is coming for food trucks across Texas. Right now, food truck owners must seek permits from each city they hope to operate in. Starting in July, a new law will take effect, which lets owners get one permit to operate statewide. Proponents say it gives small business owners an advantage, while cities like Austin will lose some authority. Eric Henriksen takes an in-depth look at the new law and how it could impact one owner who opened his food truck at just 19 years old.
I just knew Cuban sandwiches had to come to Austin.
At 19 years old,
They're the best sandwich on earth.
Connor Garbo may be the youngest food truck owner in Austin.
I opened 1 month ago. Maybe one day I'll do a brick and mortar, but to start off, I'm doing a food truck.
It's an industry going through major changes in Texas.
We currently spend over $21,000 a year on business licenses in Texas alone.
Under a previous law, food truck operators had to pay for permits for every city they operated in.
We've had instances where we couldn't organize food truck events in certain cities because their truck regulations were too complicated and time consuming.
But a new law goes into effect this July.
Why not just have one statewide health permit that's good anywhere in the state of Texas?
Representative Brooks Landgraf authored that bill.
This will help promote entrepreneurism because it cuts down on the red tape. It allows these vendors to focus on health and safety.
Food truck owners like Connor will now get one permit. allowing them to operate anywhere in Texas.
I definitely want to venture up to like Georgetown, maybe Pflugerville, Round Rock area.
This week, Representative Landgraf is working with the Department of State Health Services to finalize details, ensuring that
any permit that has been issued by a local health authority for the year 2026, that stays in effect for the remainder of the year.
fees collected by the state will go to health inspections, money that previously went to the city. Austin Public Health told KXAN that in 2025, they collected over $600,000 in licensing and permitting fees.
The only complaints that I've heard at this point are from a couple of local health departments who are disappointed that they're going to be missing out on some of the revenue that they would get.
For Connor, owning his own food truck is worth the hours he spends each day.
This is a dream come true, to say the least. I've worked really, really hard for this.
Eric Hendrickson, State of Texas.
The new law continues a push to limit the scope of some local ordinances in Texas. You may remember in 2023, state lawmakers passed legislation to limit local governments from having laws more strict than the states in several areas. Democratic state lawmakers called it the Death Star bill, saying it aimed to kill progressive ordinances passed by cities. For example, in Austin and Dallas, the law blocked city ordinances that required water breaks for construction workers. Supporters of the law say it makes it easier for businesses to comply with rules and regulations across the state, which can boost jobs and the economy in Texas. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.